Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we're going to begin the funeral service of Mrs. Jan Miller. We welcome those of you who are joining us via live stream. For those of you who are here, please take a moment to be sure that your cell phones have been turned off. Chazan Stephen Storr and Rabbi David Chapman from Congregation Beth Shalom will be officiating.
Eshet Chayil Mimtza Verachok Mipninim Mikra Batach Balev Balal Mishalal Lo Yechsar Gimalat Tuv Tov Elora Kol Yemei Chayeha Kapa parsali ani v'yadeha shilcha le'evyon. Oz v'hadar levusha v'tizchak le'ol yom acharon. Pia podcha b'chochma b'tor chesed alishon natsufia olichot beita v'lechem atzlut lo tochel. Kamuvaneha v'yashruha Bala v'halelai Yishayirat Adonai titala Tenula mepriyadeha Mehaleluha v'asharim Mahaseha. A brief partial translation of this proverb, the woman of valor. A woman of valor who can find? Her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusted in her, and he has no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all of the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works willingly with her hands. Her children have come forward to bless her, as her husband had only praise for her.
The words that Cantor Storr shared are both the Hebrew and the traditional translation of those verses from Proverbs that we so deeply associate with that idea of an Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor. There's also a contemporary translation by Juliet Spitzer that I think speaks to Jan's unique qualities and contributions in a different light, and I'll share those words by Juliet Spitzer now. A woman of valor for today. A good woman is so hard to find. She is more precious than rubies. Her circle cast with friendship deep, full of love and graceful ease. She extends her heart to those in need, encourages her friends to succeed. Trust in her with your secrets. Know that she'll hold you gently. When she speaks, wisdom is spread around, her depth of compassion so profound. She is a woman of valor.
Whether we use the words of long ago or these modern readings, Tony, at our meeting, suggested that Jan met the criteria of this very celebrated Eshet Chayil. Jan Jacoby was born in Chicago. Her parents, Estelle and Roy, and she would be their only child. She was such a sweet and good girl that her mother, once becoming a grandmother, admitted to Jan that she had no idea how to corral her grandchildren after having such an easy time having raised her. Jan was raised primarily by her mother, her grandparents, and 2 aunts and uncles. In fact, it was said that they spoiled her rotten, to which Jan would have confessed to having been true. The need for extended family hands-on care for Jan was that her father sadly took ill when she was but 12, passing away when she was but 17. I learned that Jan matriculated through high school early so that her father could attend her graduation. Ron, her firstborn child, harbors much more detail about Jan's younger years and those, of course, of his own upbringing, which he will now share with us. After which Lori has written some of her memories down for us to hear, and Steve will offer some of his vivid memories, feelings, and family anecdotes. If you would, please.
First, I want to thank everybody for being here to honor my mother's memory and her life, and to support us with your love. We can feel it as we sat here and greeted all of you, the love and the sense of community that we have here is just wonderful. So thank you. So Mom did grow up in Rogers Park, the north side of Chicago. And I don't want to repeat all the details you all already gave. But she talked about how having her extended family nearby, the folks, as we called them, her mother Stell's two sisters, May and Martha, and their husbands, had a formative influence on her. It's not just that they spoiled her, it's that they gave her an embrace of love. And she brought that from her childhood experience to her parenting experience very deliberately. She wanted to provide the same kind of nurturing environment that she had enjoyed as a child. And all three of us can attest to the fact that she certainly did. She told a story often about her grandfather, Hermann Heller, who grew up in Vienna, in Austria, and was studying to be an opera singer. And I don't know if it was an illness or something that prevented him from having a real career, which was a loss. But a number of years later, when the three of us were young adults, Mom and Dad brought us to Europe, first time, been outside of North America, and we went to Vienna, and we went to a park where there's a statue of Johann Strauss, and my mom said it was one of the wonderful moments of her life. She felt connected to her ancestors, to her grandfather who had studied music there. She always loved Strauss's waltzes because of that. So growing up here, her mom, Stell, as well as her father, Roy, was working. This was the Depression. Mom was born in 1934. So they needed some extra income. Her mom was working. So after school, Mom would go over to the Casper house where she met a little girl, Jackie. And they became friends at the age of 7 and were together for decades and decades after that, a lifelong friendship. A little bit later, I think it was high school, maybe even earlier, Mom met Claire, another friend for decades and decades. And Mom valued these connections, these ongoing connections with her friends. I'll say a little bit about just the beginning of her career before I came along and put an end to it. But she was told by a teacher in middle school, and I should throw in parentheses here, her mom wanted to discover California. She wanted to be in California for a while. So when Mom was 11, they moved to Los Angeles and lived there for 3 years. She went to middle school in California. And there was a Spanish teacher who was impressed by her and said, you have a gift. You should pursue this and learn Spanish. And when she came back to Chicago and started high school at Sullivan High School, she continued with Spanish. And when she graduated there, she went to a specialized school for learning, I guess it was secretarial skills, but also languages. And she deepened her knowledge of Spanish, and then took a job as a bilingual secretary for an executive at Borg Warner Company. And for a couple years, she was apparently a very skilled and interpreter and was very happy with this work. During that time, she met Dad. Maybe one of you will say more about that. But then she became pregnant, and the company said, well, we don't really want pregnant women out in the office, so maybe it's time to move on. So that was really the end of her career outside the home, but what began then was an amazing career as a mother and homemaker and provider and a welcomer to all of our friends, all of Dad's friends and associates. That our home was always a welcoming place, and Borg Warner's loss was our gain. And I think I will leave it at that, and Lori's next now. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to try to get through this, and Steve is going to rescue me if he needs to. As the only daughter, my relationship with my mom was more as a best friend and a confidant. We would tell each other everything. We would have long, long conversations to the point that this was after I had moved out of the house, and my dad would be in the room, and he'd go away and do something and come back, and he'd say, "Are you two still talking?" We had many, many of those long conversations. I could tell her everything and anything. We had a lot of the same common things that we loved. Shopping, many, many hours at the malls, and we did some damage to probably my dad's credit card. He would always say that for certain things, he would give her an unlimited budget and she would exceed it. We both loved Las Vegas, and starting when I was 17, before it was even really legal, we took annual trips for about 20 years to Las Vegas. But the first trip at 17 was with both of my grandmothers, and my mom would say, "Put on a lot of makeup, and if you win a jackpot, call one of us because you're not allowed to be playing." And then those trips continued for about 20 more years. Every year to Las Vegas. My dad never liked Vegas, so he would let us go and do a lot of more damage to the credit card. Spanish, as you heard, my mom's background was mine, almost mirrored that exactly. The same exact experience in middle school with a teacher telling me that I had a proficiency for it. I went on to major in it and worked in the bilingual field in Spanish media. So that was a very similar thing that happened with a teacher that recognized that ability. Decorating is something we both loved. When I moved into my first place, my mother, every single detail helped me decorate my place. And it was all peach, which was my favorite color at the time. And her attention to detail with decorating and party planning. Most of you have been to some of my mom's parties. The details that she put into planning those parties, she and I both really enjoyed that. Flowers, we both love flowers, especially peach roses. The Cubs, I have to mention the Cubs. When the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, my first thought instantly was that I'm so glad my mother got to see the Cubs win a World Series. She waited a very long time for that. And I think we're going to wait a long time for the next one. Neil Diamond was also a favorite of both of ours, and we went to several concerts together to see him. And we shared just a lot of the same things that we both loved and did them together like best friends. She also loved a lot of other things kind of in pop culture, like E.T., which I think we're going to hear more about. Her soap operas, that goes back even before my time, As the World Turns. I don't know how long that's been off the air. Her stories, those were her stories. She loved Michael J. Fox. I think you saw that one of the charities that the family mentioned was Michael J. Fox Foundation. She loved Fonzie and Denzel Washington movies. And those were some of the things she loved. My mother had very strong opinions about things. When she liked someone or something, you knew it, but when she didn't, you also knew that too. One of the first words that comes to mind when I think about my mom is loyalty. She was the most loyal person. When she liked you, loved you, you knew it, and she would do anything for us, for anybody that she cared about. When we moved to Riverwoods, she would not leave her hairdresser, who she'd been going to for years. She drove from Riverwoods to Skokie for years and years. She wouldn't leave him. I think she instilled in me the dislike for change. I'm very much like her in that way. We like things the way we like them, and we don't like change. So I take after her in that. But the most important thing my mom told me that I will carry with me for the rest of my life is how to treat other people. She knew how to treat people, and she lived by the golden rule that you treat people properly. So I am going to turn it over to Steve, and he will continue.
Good job, man.
Thank you.
I'm still not as tall as my brother, even standing on this thing. Not sure why this thing wasn't movable when you were talking, so you didn't tower over me. The resemblance is amazing, isn't it? So Mom never missed a performance of ours, whether it was on a baseball field or on a stage or in an orchestra or band performance. She never, ever missed a performance. I got involved in theater when I was 8 years old, not very far from where we are right now. And I didn't drive yet. I know I'm precocious, but at 8 years old, I didn't drive yet. So my mother had to schlep me to rehearsals. And one of the first plays I was in was actually at their high school. When they were in high school, it was The King and I, and they needed little princes and princesses, and I was one of them. So my mother would bring me and sit in the audience during rehearsal the whole time and then bring me home. Lori and Ron talked about how our friends were always welcomed in our home. It kind of became that house that everybody wanted to go to. It was the place where everyone gathered. It was the place where the cast parties were after the shows. The Miller's house was where they wanted to go, and it wasn't only because of us. It was a lot because of our mom and dad, too. Mom was a woman ahead of her time. You heard about her proficiency in Spanish. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, she taught Spanish to preschool kids. She went into a preschool and became a Spanish teacher. I'm not sure that was very common back then. It's probably much more common now. She was very much ahead of her time. And also, she coached my Little League team. Now again, you heard from Lori how she loved baseball, and she loved baseball. But a mom coaching your Little League team, nowadays, very common. In like the early 1970s, that wasn't very common. But our mom did that. She was ahead of her time. You heard about how close she was with not only her mother, our grandmother, but also our great aunt and uncle. And that really, it modeled for us the behavior of always keeping family close, always being close to family, even if they weren't physically, geographically close. It's so important to keep family close. Her favorite holiday, at least her favorite holiday to prepare for, was Thanksgiving. And she loved it. She loved making everything. And the house smelled like all the turkey and fixings for days before Thanksgiving, and it was wonderful. She was an amazing cook and a great baker. And I don't know why this is, but the only thing I remember her making that was my favorite is this thing called cheese rolls. If you've had them, you know. And I will tell you, they are white bread and butter and Velveeta cheese. So She's an amazing baker. She prepared dinners for us almost every night. And that's what I remember the cheese rolls like for Thanksgiving. She did things her way, including at the very end. When the hospice nurse came to visit, we were all there. Hospice nurse came to visit, and she said, I think it's going to be a matter of days. And we think my mom heard that because about 15 minutes later, she passed. She's like, you know what? It's not going to be a matter of days. It's going to be when I say it is, and it's going to be now. We really want to thank Lanny, who has been a tremendous caregiver to her over the last year, provided amazing, amazing care. So thank you, Lanny, who's here today. And we also want to thank our fourth sibling, Tammy, who's been with the family for about 20 years. And we joke that she's kind of like the other sister to the three of us. She is the only one who provided Mom with a grandpuppy. And our mom never liked dogs until Tammy brought Buster into their house over the last year or two. And then my mom loved this dog. This dog's picture is on the same shelf as the grandchildren. I'm not going to say it's in front of the grandchildren because then the grandchildren might be upset by that. But the dog was really important to her. And Tammy, thank you so much for all of the care and love that you've given to both of our parents. It's so meaningful to us and really makes us feel comfortable with that. So, Mom and Dad were married for almost 70 years. 2 months more, and it would have been 70 years. They were together for 70 years. I can't imagine, no offense, Diane, being with the same person for 70 years. This was an amazing partnership, and again, our parents modeled for us what a loving, meaningful, committed, loyal relationship is. Mom led an exemplary life, and her legacy lives on through her children and her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren. We love you, Mom, and we'll miss you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron and Lori and Steve, for those deep and meaningful words. Of all of our Tehillim, of all of our Psalms, our tradition has chosen the 23rd Psalm as the liturgical offering for moments like this, moments of sadness and reflection and grief. And I sometimes wonder why this psalm was chosen, and I think it has to do with the fact that the words of the psalm describe a life that has touched both joy and some sadness and some challenge and some ups and some downs, like all of our lives have, including Jan's. But ultimately, a life in which, on balance, the cup overflows with blessing, the blessing of meaningful relationships, the blessing of family, the blessing of a life of purpose. And we take comfort in knowing that Jan's life did overflow with that blessing. I invite you to join me as we read together in English the 23rd Psalm, which you can find in your brochure. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
מזמור לדוד. אדוני, רואי לו אכסר, בנוטש ירביצני על מי מנוחות ינהלני. נפשי ישובב ינחני במעגלי צדק למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגץ המוות לא אירא רע כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צוררי, דשנת ושמן ראשי כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. You heard some of Jan's early childhood. Sometime soon thereafter, she would meet Harvey Miller, a young man freshly discharged from the Navy circa June of 1954. It so happened that Harvey was to attend a wedding of his cousin, but had no date. As Harvey puts it, his little black book was no longer timely or advantageous after his time away at the Navy. Harvey's brother Jack and then wife Audrey fixed Harvey up with Jan. On July 4th, I believe you said, was the first time you really laid eyes on this 20-year-old secretary. You confessed that you noticed how wonderfully she represented herself. So very classy. A movie screen beauty, 24-inch waist, hair done perfectly, nails manicured exquisitely, which you didn't know would continue every week for 70 years. A fun twist of humor Harvey adds in is that the reason their date went so well was that the day before, Jan had been on an awful date, and so Harvey seemed like a real treat. They would quickly mold into a very serious couple, and in September, he would propose to her on Montrose Beach. Another moment of admission, Harvey, that you offered was that you didn't have what you needed to be able to offer her an engagement ring when you proposed. It would take her 5 years until she received that ring. I'm only guessing, but I imagine, Harvey, you've made it up to her over these 70 years. You married in February of 1955 at the Belden Stratford Hotel in what you remember to have been a great and joyful event which went late into the night. Oh, how you danced on the night you were wed, the vows, your true love, though a word wasn't said. The world was in bloom, there were stars in the skies, except for the few that were there in your eyes. It continues on, dear, as I held you close in my arms, angels were singing a hymn to your charms. Two hearts gently beating, murmuring low, darling, my darling, I love you so. The night seemed to fade in the blossoming dawn. The sun shone anew, but the dance lingered on. Could we but recall that sweet moment sublime, when find that our love is unaltered by time. Darling, my darling, I yet love you so. 70 years, and some people were telling us we'd never last, Harvey smiled as he reminisced about their long years together. You told us that Jan's mom took a strong liking to you almost immediately. You admitted she had good taste. And that was quite a compliment, as she was a very protective mother over her only child. You were blessed to get along quite well together, as you did with Jan's aunt and uncle over the years. They saw you quality and potential to be a fine husband. How Jan had always wished that her father would have had the chance to know you. She never forgot and always honored the love she received from her elders and was brought up in a most proper way. She was brought up to be a woman who knew right from wrong and how to respect and treat people. Like the Eshet Chaya, which we read earlier, strength and dignity are her clothing. She opens her mouth and there is wisdom, and the law of kindness was found on her tongue. She would be sure to teach her children not to speak poorly about anyone else. As she was taught by her mother, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. And she lived that way to the very, very end. And based on all of her wonderful attributes, your parents, Harvey, immediately accepted Jan into their arms and into their hearts. Your marriage evolved, and you were a young man trying to earn a living. You told us making $90 a week, and you were still going through night school to try to earn your credits to gain your electrical engineering certificate, which incidentally you had been doing while in the Navy. It was 1956 when your brother Jack opened up the business into which he invited you to join him. But at that time, you and Jan were expecting or had your son already, and you were still in night school. It was a stretch, and you were unsure whether or not to give up that $90 a week job. But by 1957, you decided to make the leap, having needed to borrow $2,500 from your mother-in-law to buy your way in. Jan continued to do her fair share of work until, as Ron said, she started to show. Her aunt brought her multiple outfits to try to conceal her condition, but finally it became undisguisable. That's when the total focus turned to being a homemaker and a full-time mom. That would ultimately pay dividends, the blessings of children and their future families, Ron and Jacqueline, Lori and Tony, Steve and Diane, and then grandchildren, Justin and Ada, Robin, Daniel, Katie, Jacob, Rachel and Elisa, and great-grandchildren Liliana and Aurelia. Jen was an omnipresent mother, as you heard, specifically for her two older children when they would come home from school each day, always with a glass of milk and cookies. Steve was a bit more maybe independent, as he was the youngest of the three, being brought up in the Miller home. Maybe Jen was loosening up on her worrying, which she did so well. Lori said her mom used to do all of the worrying, and when Lori had her son Jacob, she was relieved from needing to worry because mom worried for both of us. I was told all three of her children were very, very good kids and never trouble to her, but the source of this information was from the three kids. Except sometimes when they would be wrestling and roughhousing in the house. And when they did, Jan would offer the traditional mother's call worldwide, wait till your father gets home. For a period of time, in the midst of raising the three children, as you heard Steve mention, she would drive him to and from, but she took a break from driving, and she would walk or take buses to get to the grocery store or to accomplish some other errands. She managed well most of the time, but there was that time in 1967 when she needed help, but it was a terrible snowstorm, and her mother would come to the rescue, schlepping on 2 buses to make the trip to Skokie, to their home, 8214 Keystone. She would help with the kids. That was the epicenter of the Miller family growing years, Keystone, where Ron and Lori said they planted a maple tree together as little children, where you might be able to see today as the funeral procession will be passing through 8214 Keystone. As you heard, Jan and Harvey loved when their children's friends felt at home in their home. I'm sure many of those people possibly here today recall the soda fountain and the freezer of ice cream, which you've always emptied gladly. Jan was such an exemplary hostess, most often ordering enough and more than enough food for her guests. She herself was a very good cook and a baker, the family boasted. When she began to cook and bake less, she upped her game to party planning. She had a knack for flowers, as Lori said, and decor. And Harvey said Jan always aspired to create memorable and wonderful events. Some of her other skills included playing mahjong, most often with a very steady group of dear friends, and even made sure when recreating your home on Brayburn Court, that she designed it with a mahjong room. I heard she was quite astute at the game. Harvey, I don't think you really thought that all of these years that you had accomplished the family success with just your earnings. Jan had her own pushka of mahjong funds that were considerably a help. Jan was as well a solitude woman and enjoyed time watching her detective TV shows or movies. You might catch her with a box of chocolates by her side, for which she had a true sweet tooth. You will find, if you didn't see them on your way in, Reese's Pieces and Mr. Good bars out in the lobby for a little nush, courtesy of the family and the Chicago Jewish staff. Jan also had a cultured palate for a very special regalach, you told me, from Russ and Daughter's Bakery in New York, not in the lobby. And when not channel surfing, she used her time devouring countless books. She was a voracious reader. Nothing too heavy, more so a fanciful and sometimes risque Harlequin type of story. Laurie admitted that some of the book covers should have had a PG protection over them. And while those books took some people on dreamy journeys, Jan had a fascination of another dream, and that was rooting on those Cubs. But how elated she was as she did get to see that World Series. And she also enjoyed exploring your world, Harvey. So many remarkable places, Hawaii being one of her most favorite. She wasn't a fan of sun or humidity, but she cherished the views and the beauty of the landscapes. And back here in Chicago, she would always comment on the beauty of the first snowfall of each winter, you told us. Jan was a woman who appreciated lovely places and lovely people. She truly possessed an others-first mentality, her children said. She expressed that with family and friends and with certain charities in which she found significant meaning. That is how she expressed herself. The M.J. Fox Foundation, which works towards curing Parkinson's, as well as one called HARC, H-A-R-C, which worked to help children with special needs. Jan's consistent support of you, Harvey, was another purpose of her role in life. She was your ezer kenegdo, your perfect helpmate. She would become for you a perfect partner. How proud she was of your success, the success that you built with your brothers, as well as your own professional endeavors. And while she may not have chosen the same direction of charitable giving to certain organizations, like this Meshuggah group of cantors that you often support, I know she was proud of the process which you took in every venture that you approached. And I know you often asked Jan for her ear, for advice, as you were true partners. And those lessons of marital loyalty and partnership, as well as the lessons of purposeful charity, has been passed down to several generations of your family. She encouraged your traveling on scuba trips and many other adventures, such as trying to find the crossing of the Red Sea passage over in Egypt and Israel. And you could do so because you trusted her. You know she had the abilities to care for the house and the family while you were gone. Not so much your tropical fish, but that's another story. And as you said, she wasn't an animal lover in general, but Buster did win over her heart. For long years, Jan was known to many people outside of her immediate circle as Mrs. Harvey Miller. And yet, those who did know Jan individually knew she had her own voice and her own convictions. Not a shy woman to voice her thoughts, she was also a woman of class and great taste. She had a sharp mind, and you said would often write poems for special occasions in the family's lives. And for other special occasions, such as birthdays, Jan was always generous of heart. She loved wrapping and giving gifts to you, and became especially cheery when she could start shopping for granddaughter's outfits after having to shop for 4 grandsons prior. Jan was so fortunate to have the presence in her home this past year with Lanny, and hit the jackpot as well when Tammy had entered her life some 20 years ago, who so deeply cared for her and was a fine advocate and sounding board for your friend Jan. A multitude of peoples loved Jan, and many others found her to be so much more than an acquaintance. For instance, as you mentioned, Jackie and Claire, who probably felt like they were sisters, the sisters Jan never had. And there are other extended family like Gemma who would honor her as they might a grandma. And to friends, her children, your friends, to whom she was always so gracious, many of them may have looked at her as a second mother in their lives. People felt close because they could sense that Jan's pleasure came from delighting in other people's well-being and in their happiness. There's a word for that called mudita. She would muster up her strength even when not feeling well and go, though tired, to show up to programs and special milestones such as a granddaughter's graduation party this past June, which would actually become her last trip out of her home. Being that Jan grew up in the shadow of her father's absence and being an only child and having no cousins with whom to play, she wanted that big and loving family, much like she was raised by her mom and, as you heard, the folks. As matriarch of this wonderful circle of relatives, Jan had no boxes on her bucket list to check. She had done it all. And thus, on last Thursday at 10:19 a.m., after hours of having lied in bed with her eyes open, Jan Miller softly closed her eyelids, quietly sipped her final breath, and relinquished her grasp on life. Family and loved ones surrounded her bedside and paid a royal homage to her role as this family's matriarch. There was some soft singing of prayers to be chanted. There were families' words of release and love and blessing that they spoke. And the prayer Shema Yisrael was sung in unison as each person's heart breathed in a singular rhythm of love for her. Jan loved the homes that you built together, Harvey, be it on Keystone or Braeburn Court, home 1 and 2 on Braeburn. She loved Hawaii. She loved your places in Florida. She always found her peace when she was at home. Maybe that's why she took such a liking to the family movie E.T. Like the main character who always yearned to go home. I want to go home. Jan would always ask you, Harvey, to take her home, whether you were far away, out of the country, or take her out of rehab or the hospitals. She'd say, Harvey, it's time for me to go home. And you did that for her every time. And your family made sure that you honored one of her most passionate wishes, and that was to remain in her home until that final day. She closed her eyes, she handed over the keys, and trusted that all of you would continue to watch over her legacy and her memories. And now she is to watch over you until one day she will welcome you home. L'chi shalom, Jan. Go in peace in the gentle winds. Amen. Let us ask you to rise as we complete our service with a memorial prayer. Emalei rachamim shochen bamromim hametzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei ashchina b'malot kedoshim utorim כזוהר רקיע מזהירים את נשמת פגלה בת ראובן ויסתר שלחה לעולמה בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה Ana balo rachamim, hasdireha b'seter knafecha liolamim, utzror b'tzror hachayim et nishmata, Adonai hu nachalata v'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar Amen.
Please join me in the English. O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy presence among the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament unto the soul of Janice Faye Miller, who has gone unto eternity. Lord of mercy, bring her under the cover of thy wings, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Be God's possession, and may her repose be peace. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment service will continue at West Lawn Cemetery, located at 7801 West Montrose in Norwich. The family will be returning to the Miller residence at 1538 Brayburn Court in Riverwoods. They'll be together following the service till 8 p.m., Tuesday through Thursday from 3 to 8 p.m., Friday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Memorial contributions in her memory to Congregation Beth Shalom, the City of Hope, Michael J. Fox Foundation, the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. All that information can be found on the service folder. For those of you who are joining us via live stream, that information can be found on the funeral home's website. For those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession to the cemetery, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing a car in the back of the procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. Please use your horn liberally as you're going through the intersections. Please do not speak or text on your cellular phone while driving to a cemetery. Also, I do want to let you know that I think this is a beautiful gesture that Mr. Miller wants to do. We will be driving by their original home at 8214 Keystone here in Skokie. So if you think we're going the wrong way to West Lawn, we are not. At this time, I'd like to call upon the pallbearers and honorary pallbearers. Please rise as we escort the casket of Jan Miller from the chapel. Then you may return to your cars. Also, ladies and gentlemen, you could use the front exit here as well. Please rise.
Shalom Aleichem.